Coming up today, President Park Geun-hye is in Washington for the 2016 Nuclear Security Summit. The best way to rein in North Korea is likely to dominate her discussions with the leaders of the United States, China and Japan. The official campaigning period for the April 13th general election has begun. Candidates have less than a fortnight to win the hearts of voters ahead of Election Day. Plus, in some welcome news for the economy, Korea's industrial output soars by its biggest on-month margin in more than 6 years in February, with the semiconductor sector leading the charge. Stay tuned for these stories and more. Hello, it's noon on Thursday, the 31st of March. You're tuned in to our midday newscast here on Arirang TV. Thank you for joining us. I'm Mark Broom. We are going to start with our extensive coverage of the 2016 Nuclear Security Summit that begins on Thursday in Washington. So, President Park Geun-hye is now in Washington for the fourth and final Nuclear Security Summit. The South Korean leader plans to win international consensus on more effectively implementing sanctions on North Korea's nuclear ambitions. Our presidential office correspondent Song Ji-son files this report from Washington.
President Park Geun-hye's multilateral diplomacy will take center stage at this year's Nuclear Security Summit in Washington, as she arrived in the U.S. Capitol Wednesday local time. Before the official summit programs begin on Thursday, President Park will start the day with a one-on-one with U.S. President Barack Obama. The two will then be joined by Japanese Prime Minister Shinzo Abe for trilateral talks, where the leaders will discuss countermeasures and sanctions on North Korea for its recent nuclear and missile provocations. Following a bilateral meeting with Abe, President Park will also hold in-depth discussions on Pyongyang with Chinese President Xi Jinping. The North Korean nuclear issue is not on official agenda at the Nuclear Security Summit, as the safe management of nuclear fuel and better protecting the world from nuclear terror threats are the main goals. But as Pyongyang's fourth nuclear test and long-range missile launch earlier this year once again threaten global peace and security, President Park will seek to strengthen international support and cooperation to quash North Korea's nuclear ambitions. As this will be the first time that the world leaders are gathered in the same roof since North Korea's fourth nuclear test on January 6, President Park Geun-hye will not want to waste this opportunity, both at one-on-one sessions and during official programs at the Nuclear Security Summit, to firmly discourage Pyongyang from pushing forward another provocation like a fifth nuclear test. Song Ji-son, Arirang News, Washington.
Now, when President Park Geun-hye sits down for talks with her counterparts from the US, Japan and China, she's also expected to delve into the issue of denuclearizing North Korea. For more on what's likely to be on the agenda during the president's bilateral summits with the three countries, Connie Kim reports.
The growing threat of a nuclear-armed North Korea will be the main item on the agenda for South Korean President Park Geun-hye during back-to-back summits with the U.S., Japan, and China in Washington on Thursday. North Korea's nuclear and missile development are likely to be at the center of discussions when the South Korean and U.S. presidents sit down for talks before holding a trilateral summit with Japan. The two leaders are also likely to discuss their unilateral sanctions on the North and UN sanctions adopted earlier this month, both aimed at cutting off funding for the regime's nuclear weapons program. Cooperation between President Park and Japanese Prime Minister Shinzo Abe on pressuring Pyongyang is expected to accelerate following progress on one of the most contentious issues between them, the settlement on the so-called comfort women issue reached late last year. However, the two may still engage in discussions on the implementation of the landmark deal in the wake of Tokyo's denials of the fourth nature of its wartime sexual slavery program. Another issue that could be raised by the Japanese Prime Minister is the South Korean ban on Japanese fish and seafood following the 2011 meltdown of Japan's nuclear power plant.
When the South Korean leader sits down for a one-on-one meeting with her Chinese counterpart Xi Jinping, President Park will focus on reaffirming China's cooperation on denuclearizing Pyongyang. One of the more controversial issues is expected to be the possible deployment of the U.S. missile defense system THAAD to South Korea. Another priority for President Park will be persuading China to end its push for a peace treaty with North Korea, officially ending the Korean War, as South Korea and the U.S. both want the North to abandon its nukes first. This is President Park's first meeting with her regional counterparts since North Korea's latest nuclear and missile provocations. And the results are expected to shape the way they deal with North Korea's nuclear threats in the future. Connie Kim, Arirang News.
Now, staying with the Nuclear Security Summit, and we're now going to take a look at what's expected of the TRILATERAL summit between South Korea, the US and Japan that is set to take place at midnight tonight, South Korea time. And as our Han-dan tells us, strengthening cooperation on the implementation of the latest North Korea sanctions is likely to take center stage.
On the sidelines of the fourth Nuclear Security Summit, President Park Geun-hye, U.S. President Barack Obama, and Japanese Prime Minister Shinzo Abe will hold a trilateral summit at midnight Friday, Korea time. The meeting, which last took place in 2014, is garnering extra attention as it comes after the landmark South Korea-Japan agreement on wartime sex slaves that has thawed the icy relations between the two neighboring countries. Amid the conciliatory atmosphere, the three nations are expected to focus on strengthening implementation of the latest sanctions on North Korea.
Ways to boost three-way cooperation in the execution of North Korea sanctions will likely take center stage during the talks. Strengthening trilateral security ties will also be part of the summit agenda.
Most experts say the summit will be a chance for the three nations to reconfirm their stance against North Korea's provocations rather than coming up with a new strategy for dealing with the North.
Beijing has taken part in the international sanctions on North Korea, while Seoul, Washington, and Tokyo have also imposed separate individual sanctions. Against this backdrop, no new strategy or agreement is expected. They will focus on making sure that the North Korea sanctions are fully implemented.
While the three leaders will try not to provoke China too much, experts say the biggest challenge for South Korea will be to boost ties with the U.S. and Japan, while at the same time maintain healthy relations with China. Han-dan, Arirang News.
Now, in an interview with Bloomberg News ahead of the Nuclear Security Summit, President Park Geun-hye reaffirmed that South Korea is committed to nuclear non-proliferation and that denuclearization should start on the Korean Peninsula. Hwang Ho-jun has the details.
The leaders of 52 countries and 4 international organizations will highlight the achievements from previous meetings at this year's Nuclear Security Summit, including the efforts by individual countries to reduce their nuclear arsenals as they build a more sustainable security architecture for carrying out their denuclearization commitments in the future. Although persuading North Korea to give up its nuke is not on the agenda, President Park Geun-hye says South Korea remains firm on its stance that it will lead the world in denuclearization and not develop its own arsenal. In a written interview with Bloomberg News published Thursday ahead of the summit, President Park says she has a strong conviction that the vision for a nuclear-free world must begin with the Korean Peninsula. There have been growing calls from some in South Korea, and most recently from Republican presidential candidate Donald Trump, for the country to develop its own nuclear arsenal in the face of continued provocations from North Korea. The UN Security Council imposed a tough new set of sanctions on Pyongyang in the wake of its nuclear tests and missile launches. In response, North Korea has fired off several more missiles and vowed another nuclear test. President Park said the North would self-destruct if it continues to go down this path, and said that it's a problem that should not be neglected, as it will lead to an irreparable catastrophe on the Korean Peninsula and the collapse of the foundation for peace and order in Northeast Asia and the world. President Park also said she would continue to impose sanctions on North Korea instead of pursuing dialogue in order to induce change in Pyongyang. Hwang Ho-jun, Arirang News.
Now, North Korea will be a key topic when US President Barack Obama holds a one-on-one with Chinese President Xi Jinping this week on the sidelines of the Nuclear Security Summit in Washington. Park Jung-hong reports.
Joint efforts to step up pressure on an increasingly belligerent North Korea will be a key focus of the talks. The meeting between Presidents Obama and Xi comes at a key time as Pyongyang has been stoking tension in the region by threatening attacks and firing a series of ballistic missiles into the sea.
There obviously are a wide range of issues that the United States and China are able to effectively coordinate on. The best example of that recently is that, our efforts to work together to isolate and apply further pressure on the North Korean regime for their destabilizing activities on the Korean Peninsula.
The summit is drawing extra attention as the leaders will hold in-depth discussions on the recent UN Security Council sanctions resolution on North Korea and its implementation. President Obama is expected to urge China to play the leading role in carrying out the sanctions while acknowledging Beijing's efforts in drawing up and adopting the UN resolution. President Xi is likely to underscore the need for dialogue with North Korea under a broader framework. Pundits say he may propose restarting the long-stalled six-party talks to discuss the issues of denuclearization together with forging a peace treaty that would replace the decades-old armistice agreement on the Korean Peninsula. Diplomatic sources in Washington have also been speculating on whether Seoul and Washington's plan to deploy a powerful U.S. missile defense system known as THAAD to the Korean Peninsula will come up during discussions. Beijing has expressed its strong objections on numerous occasions, saying THAAD's radar system would be able to monitor its territory. Other issues set for discussion include the militarization of the South China Sea, cybersecurity, and China's questionable human rights record. Park Jong-hong, Arirang News.
U.S. Treasury Secretary Jack Lew says only sanctions can bring about change in North Korea's nuclear calculus. Speaking at the Carnegie Endowment for International Peace on Wednesday local time, the U.S. official called for the stringent implementation of the latest UN Security Council sanctions against the North. Lew noted that the U.S. is working closely with China and others to ensure the toughest ever sanctions are effective. The Secretary reiterated that robust international cooperation is the only way to convince North Korea to stop its illicit activities. He noted that the sanctions are a testament to the world's resolve to stop the North's nuclear and missile programs. Now, in the rest of the day's news, an official campaigning for the April 13th general election is now underway. Candidates have 13 days to canvass voters and spread their message. The main focus today is Seoul and its heavily populated surrounding areas. The chairman of the ruling Saenuri Party, Kim Woo-sung, is wasting no time at all. He'll visit no fewer than 10 different districts around the capital on Thursday to throw his support behind the Conservative Party's candidates. You can see him already doing that there. The party's floor leader, Won Yu-chol, is lending his voice to candidates in Gyeonggi-do province, the most populous province that surrounds Seoul. The interim leader of the main opposition Minju Party, Kim Jong-in, is targeting Seoul's traditional markets, attempting to secure the votes of small merchants. The party hopes to woo people from low and middle income brackets to vote for them on April 13th. Another political heavyweight crisscrossing Seoul today is Ahn Cheol-soo. The co-leader of the minor opposition People's Party plans to meet people from various walks of life and spread his message that a viable third party is necessary to overhaul Korea's political system. Now, could it be another false dawn or the start of a gradual recovery for the Korean economy? The country's manufacturing output rose at the fastest pace in over 6 years in February. Business sentiment also picked up. HWANG Ji-hye tells us more.
Korea's output in the mining and manufacturing sectors was strong in February. Statistics Korea says production in the sectors rose 3.3% from the previous month, marking the fastest pace of on-month expansion since September 2009. The finance ministry says the rise came on the back of a pickup in demand for semiconductors, a sector that saw production spike nearly 20% from January.
Demand for mobile chips has risen as Korea's biggest tech giant Samsung Electronics released its new flagship Galaxy S7 smartphones. Adding to the optimism, data from the Bank of Korea shows that manufacturers' business sentiment in March rose 5 points from a month earlier to 68. It marks the first rise in 5 months, taming concerns over uncertainties in financial markets early this year that dampened business and consumer confidence. Still, a reading under 100 means pessimists outnumber optimists. And although the overall industrial output, that includes all of the country's sectors, rebounded in February, it's a mere uptick as output growth and domestic demand dragged down the rise in the manufacturing sector. Retail sales dropped nearly 2% from the previous month. HWANG Ji-hye, Arirang News.
Now, global emerging markets saw their foreign portfolio inflows surge to a 21-month high in March, according to the Institute of International Finance. The inflow amount rose to $36.8 billion this month, the strongest month since June 2014. Asian emerging markets led the way with $20.6 billion, over half of the total emerging market intake. With the straight purchases from foreigners, the Korean stock market also returned to a month of inflows after 5 months of outflows. Meanwhile, the benchmark Kospi opened higher Thursday following overnight gains on Wall Street, surpassing the 2,000 mark in the first 15 minutes of trading. North Korea has confirmed that its national budget for 2016 is 5.6% higher than last year. Pyongyang's state-run Korean Central News Agency reported on this Thursday that the budget proposal was passed during the 13th Supreme People's Assembly, which was held on Wednesday. The exact amount of the budget was not specified in the report, however. Defence spending accounts for 15.8% of the budget, down 0.1 percentage point from last year. The ever-so-slight defence cut comes despite the regime's vow to enhance its nuclear and missile capabilities. North Korea also said the budget set aside for agriculture, construction and education had gone up. A team of analysts in the United States has confirmed that it's possible North Korea is close to developing a miniaturized nuclear warhead and the means to deliver it on an intercontinental ballistic missile. Speaking on the BBC current affairs show Newsnight, Robert Monks from IHS Jane's Intelligence Review said the North's nuclear weapons program may have already reached a significant milestone by designing a viable re-entry vehicle capable of carrying a miniaturized warhead thousands of kilometers, putting the US within its range. Now, analysts were able to reach the conclusions based on computer modeling of information gleaned from a news report of Kim Jong-un visiting what was said was a missile factory early this month. Now, the second strand of evidence raised comes from satellite and radar imagery that show new roads and earthworks that could indicate excavations for new nuclear tests. There has also been increased activity at a plutonium processing plant in the past few months. Now, in the face of North Korea's nuclear development, the South Korean military will develop 5 military satellites by the year 2022 that will be used to surveil North Korea. The Defense Ministry says the satellites will be equipped with state-of-the-art radar that can detect targets even under the cloudiest of skies. The satellites will also be capable of identifying North Korea's mobile launch pads in a matter of hours. Ministry officials say the satellites will allow Seoul to keep better track of North Korea's key military facilities, including its nuclear and missile infrastructure. Now, in one of the starkest indicators yet of South Korea's rapidly aging population, newly released figures show workers in their 50s and above now outnumber those in their 20s and 30s. According to data by Statistics Korea, 9.37 million people in their 20s and 30s were employed as of last year, making up 36.1% of the working population. Over 9.6 million workers in their 50s and above made up 37.2%, outnumbering young workers for the first time since the agency began collecting related data in the year 2000. Now, the average age of a worker in Korea stood at 44.4 years. That's up 0.2 years from the previous year. According to experts, this uptrend in the number of older workers will continue as the extension of retirement age went into effect this year. Now it's exciting time for tech fans because the G5, the latest smartphone from Korean tech giant LG Electronics, has hit the shelves and did so earlier on this Thursday. Watchers say the phone's innovative features could make it a smash hit with consumers, but will it help LG smash the dominance of Apple and Samsung? Kim Min-ji reports.
Fun is what LG Electronics is promoting with its new G5, which hit shelves on Thursday. With the price tag of roughly $700 in Korea, it's the industry's first modular smartphone, which means users can connect various add-ons to instantly improve camera or sound functions. Aside from the modules, other accessories provide the user with an entirely new experience.
With the 360 cam, I can capture everything around me thanks to two 180-degree lenses on the front and back of the device.
LG says it was thinking outside the box this time around.
Our aim was to get away from the conventional smartphone and give users an experience they've never had before. We'll continue to develop unique products to differentiate ourselves from the competition.
And so far, LG seems to be on track with the majority of consumers who've tried out the product already satisfied.
I like that there's two types of lenses that can take both wide and original shots. It's easy to change from one mode to another.
It's an extremely modern design, so I think many young people will like it. I need to change my phone soon, and it's impressive enough for me to consider it as one of my options.
But will it be enough to turn the tide? LG's local rival Samsung Electronics recently began sales of its new models, while Apple has released lower-end smartphones in emerging markets. On top of that, fierce competition from Chinese rivals has eroded LG's share in the global market. Analysts say although the G5 turned out well, it all boils down to how many units LG can shift.
It remains to be seen whether the older generation will buy the G5 due to the modules. Besides, the market is already saturated, so a lot depends on how well LG can appeal to and target the people planning to switch phones. Now that Samsung's phones are already out, LG should use this time well to market its products before Apple releases its next iPhone.
The early popularity of the G5 will likely help LG turn a profit in the second quarter of this year. But analysts say down the road, the company with the best two-track approach, namely expanding production of lower-end phones while turning a profit from high-end models, will be best placed to ride the wave of the flooded smartphone market. Kim Min-ji, Arirang News.
Now, the head of tech giant Microsoft has proclaimed that chatbots are the next big thing and will have as profound an impact as previous landmark shifts in the IT sector. Speaking at a corporate event in San Francisco on Wednesday local time, the company's CEO, Satya Nadella, said chatbots are on par with past paradigm shifts like the graphical user interface, the web browser, and the iPhone-driven adoption of the touch screen. He said the concept is taking the power of human language and applying it more persuasively to computing activities. Companies like Facebook, Slack and Microsoft have been investing heavily in chatbots, or so-called conversations as a platform, in the hope of making them more accessible to non-technical users. Well, that's pretty much all we have for now. I'm Mark Broom. Just to say that we will be bringing you comprehensive coverage of the 2016 Nuclear Security Summit here on Arirang TV. So for the latest, as it happens in Washington, do stay tuned over the next couple of days. All the buzz out of the summit and the numerous meetings involving South Korea, the United States China and Japan will also be broadcast live sometimes here on Arirang TV, but of course uploaded onto our website as well, arirang.com/news. As you just saw on the weather there, it's going to be really nice here in Korea today. So if you do have time, do go and take a walk perhaps and enjoy the beautiful spring weather. We'll be back with our next scheduled newscast at 6 p.m. South Korea time. So until then, goodbye.